The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor of the Venetian ballroom, its crystal fragments catching the light from 1,000 candles like scattered diamonds. But nobody noticed. All eyes were on the bride, Isabella Romano, as she stood frozen in the doorway, her silk wedding dress pristine white against the crimson stain spreading across the floor. Blood, not wine, blood, Isabella. Her new husband's voice cut through the music, through the laughter, through the suffocating gravity of what should have been the most beautiful night of her life. What's wrong? She couldn't answer, couldn't breathe, because lying there half hidden behind the marble pillar was a body, a woman's body in a black evening gown. Her throat opened in a perfect red smile, and clutched in the dead woman's hand was a photograph that would destroy everything. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back 12 hours. When Isabella Romano was still just Isabella Marchetti, and the most dangerous thing in her life was choosing between roses or lilies for her wedding bouquet. The morning sun painted the Tuscan hills in shades of gold and amber, casting long shadows across their Romano estate. Isabella stood at her bedroom window, watching the army of wedding planners transform the gardens below into something from a fairy tale. White roses climbed every pillar, silk ribbons fluttered from every tree, and a string quartet tuned their instruments near the altar where she would pledge her life to Marco Romano in just 6 hours. It should have been perfect. It would have been perfect if not for the letter. The envelope had arrived 3 days ago, addressed to Miss Isabella Marchetti, her maiden name, which she would shed forever at sunset. Inside, just 7 words written in elegant script. Some secrets held stay buried forever. No signature, no return address. Just those 7 words that had turned her dreams into nightmares. Isabella, darling, you look pale. The voice belonged to Sophia Romano, her soon-to-be renewer, a woman who wielded kindness like a weapon and whose smile never quite reached her eyes. Pre-wedding nerves. Isabella turned from the window, forcing her lips into a smile. Just excitement, I think. Sophia glided across the room, her designer heels clicking against the ancient stone floors. At 62, she was still stunningly beautiful, with silver hair twisted into an elegant chignon and eyes the color of winter storms. She was also the most powerful woman in northern Italy, having inherited the Roman Empire after her husband's mysterious death 5 years ago. There's something I need to discuss with you, Sophia said, settling into the velvet chair by the fireplace. About your father. Isabella's blood turned to ice. My father, Vincent Marchetti, was a good man, Sophia continued, studying her perfectly manicured nails. A loyal friend to my late husband. But he made some questionable choices in his final years. I don't understand. The gambling debts, Isabella, the money he borrowed from some very dangerous people. Sophia's storm gray eyes finally met hers. Did you think we didn't know? The room seemed to spin. Isabella gripped the windowsill for support. He told me he'd taken care of everything before he died. That there were no debts. There weren't, because we took care of them. Sophia rose gracefully, smoothing her silk dress. €1,000,000, to be precise. Consider it a wedding gift. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, darling. You just need to remember that family takes care of family. And after tonight, you'll be family. Sophia moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Isabella, that pretty little investigation you've been conducting into your father's death. I'd suggest you let sleeping dogs lie. Some truths are more dangerous than ignorance. The door closed, with a soft click, leaving Isabella alone with her racing heart and the growing certainty that she was walking into a trap. But what choice did she have? The invitation had been sent, the guests had arrived, and somewhere in the gardens below, her fiancé was probably adjusting his tie and checking his watch, counting down the minutes until she became his wife, his property, his problem. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Come in. The door opened to reveal the last person she wanted to see. Alessandro Romano, Marco's older brother and the best man. At 35 he was everything Marco wasn't: dark, where Marco was light; dangerous, where Marco was safe; magnetic, where Marco was merely handsome. He was also the one man in the world she should have stayed away from. You look like you've seen a ghost, he said, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. Maybe I have. Isabella turned back to the window, unable to meet his eyes. Even after 2 years, even knowing what she knew about him, her pulse still quickened whenever he entered a room. Cold feet, something like that. She heard him move closer, felt the heat of his presence behind her. In the reflection of the window she could see him studying her with those dark eyes that missed nothing. You don't have to go through with this, he said quietly. Isabella spun around. What did you say? You heard me. Alessandro's face was unreadable, but there was something in his voice, something raw and desperate. It's not too late to walk away. Walk away from what? Your brother, your family, everything I've ever wanted. From a life that will destroy you. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, feel danger radiating from him like heat from a fire. You have no idea what you're getting into, Isabella. What this family really is. I know exactly what this family is, she said, lifting her chin defiantly. They're wealthy, powerful, and they've been nothing but kind to me. Alessandro laughed, but there was no humor in it. Kind, is that what you call it? What would you call it a cage, a beautiful golden cage that you'll never escape from once the door closes. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Isabella saw past his carefully constructed mask to the man beneath, the man who had kissed her at last year's Christmas party, who had whispered promises in her ear that heckled never keep, who had disappeared, for 3 months afterward, without explanation. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because He stopped, jaw clenching. "Because my brother deserves better than a wife who's in love with someone else." The words hung between them like a confession, like an accusation, like a death sentence. "I'm not in love with anyone else," Isabella said, but even to her own ears, the lie sounded hollow. Alessandro smiled sadly. "We both know that's not true." Before she could respond, another knock echoed through the room. This time it was Marco's voice. "Isabella, are you ready for the photographer?" "Just a minute," she called back, her voice somehow steady despite the chaos in her chest. When she looked back, Alessandro was gone. The French doors to the balcony stood open, silk curtains dancing in the morning breeze. Like a ghost, like a dream, like a mistake she should have made a long time ago. But it was too late for mistakes now. Too late for anything except the path she'd chosen, the dress hanging in her closet, the ring waiting for her finger, and the vow she would speak in 6 hours if she lived that long. Because as Isabella stood there in her childhood bedroom, watching the wedding preparations below, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her back, someone who knew about the letter, about her father's secrets, about the investigation. Sophia had somehow discovered someone who wanted her to know that she was walking into more than just a marriage. She was walking into a war. The wedding photographer was a nervous man with sweating palms and a camera that clicked, instantly capturing what he believed were candid moments of bridal preparation. He had no idea Hugh was documenting the last hours of Isabella's life as she knew it. "Beautiful, absolutely beautiful," he murmured, adjusting his lens as Isabella's maid of honor, her cousin Lucia, fastened the delicate pearl buttons that ran up the back of the silk gown. "The light from Thuendo is perfect." Isabella stared at her reflection in the antique mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back. Thedris was a masterpiece. Vintage Valentino, with a sweetheart neckline and a cathedral train that pulled her feet like spilled moonlight. Her dark hair was pinned up in an elegant chignon held in placebo, a diamond tiara that had belonged to Marco's grandmother. She looked like a princess. She felt like a prisoner. "Earth too, Isabella," Lucia said, waving a hand in front of her face. "You've been staring at yourself for 5 minutes having second thoughts." "No," Isabella lied automatically, "just overwhelmed." Lucia studied her carefully. They'd grown up together, shared secrets and dreams and heartbreaks. Iphone could see through Isabella's facade. It was her cousin. "Is this about Alessandro?" Lucia asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the photographer's clicking. Isabella's heart skipped. "What about Alessandro?" "Come on, Isa. I saw the way you looked at him at the rehearsal dinner, and the way he looked at you." Lucia lowered her voice even further. "Everyone sees it. There's nothing to see." "Bullshit." Lucia grabbed her hands, forcing Isabella to meet her eyes in the mirror. "You've been in love with him since the day Marco introduced you to his family. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" I'm going to marry his brother," Isabella said firmly. "Marco is a good man. He loves me. But do you love him?" The question hung in the air like incense, heavy and suffocating. Isabella opened her mouth to answer, to say yes, of course, she loved Marco. But the words wouldn't come, because the truth was more complicated than love or the lack thereof. Marco Romano represented one she'd ever wanted. Security, respectability, a future free from the shadows of her dismists. He was handsome in a conventional way, wealthy beyond imagination, and genuinely kind. But he wasn't Alessandro, who made her pulse race with just a look. Alessandro who challenged her, who saw through her carefully constructed facades, who kissed her like he was drowning and she was air. Alessandro who disappeared whenever things got too real, who had more secrets than the Vatican worked for, his mother in ways that kept him away for months at a time doing things he couldn't or wouldn't discuss. "Love isn't always enough," Isabella said finally. "Sometimes it's the only thing that is." Before Isabella could respond, a commotion erupted from the garden below. Raised voices, the sound of running feet, someone shouting orders in rapid Italian. Both women rushed to the window. Below, security guards were surrounding something near the rose garden, their black suits stark against the white decorations. The police car was pulling up the circular drive, its silent lights flashing blue and red against the afternoon sun. "What's happening?" Lucia breathed. Isabella's blood turned to ice as she spotted a familiar figure being escorted away from the cinnamon, with platinum blonde hair and a black dress, her hands zip-tied behind her back. It was Elena Rossi, the investigative journalist who had been helping Isabella research her father's death. "I have to go," Isabella said, already moving toward the door. "What? No, you can't watch the photographer," Isabella called over her shoulder. Gathering up her skirts as she rushed from the room, she made it halfway down the main staircase before strong hands caught her arms, stopping her descent. "Where do you think you're going?" Marco's voice was gentle but firm. Her fiancé looked devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo, his blonde hair perfectly styled, his blue eyes warm with concern. There's something happening in the garden, I know. A reporter was caught trying to sneak onto the property. Security is handling it. His hands moved to her shoulders, steadying her. You shouldn't be wandering around in your wedding dress. It's bad luck. Marco, you need to get back upstairs and finish getting ready. His tone brooked no argument. Our guests are arriving and we have a wedding to attend. Isabella stared at him, searching his face for some sign that he knew more than he was saying. But Marco's expression remained placid, concerned only with the logistics of their perfect day. Was she really just a reporter? Isabella asked. That's what security said. Why no reason? Another lie to add to the growing pile. You're right. I should get back upstairs. Marco smiled, the kind of smile that should have made her heart flutter. Instead, it felt like watching the sunset, beautiful but a harbinger of darkness. I'll see you at the altar, he said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. I love you, Isabella, I love you too, she whispered, and wondered if saying it enough times would make it true. As she climbed back up the staircase, Isabella's mind raced. Elena's arrest wasn't a coincidence. Someone knew about their investigation, knew about the questions they'd been asking about Vincent Marchetti's death, but who, and why now, on her wedding day? The answer came as she reached the top of the stairs and found Sofia Romano waiting for her, elegant and predatory as a silver-haired shark. My dear Sofia said, her voice honey-sweet and poisonous. I trust everything is proceeding smoothly, of course. Isabella forced a smile. Just some excitement with a photographer, I heard. Paparazzi, Sofia said dismissively. They have no respect for privacy. Fortunately, Alessandro was there to handle the situation. Isabella's heart lurched. Alessandro, he has such a talent for problem-solving. Sofia's smile was razor-sharp. It's one of his many gifts. The implication was clear. Alessandro had been the one to have Elena arrested. The man she thought she could trust, the man who had warned her to walk away, was working to silence the very person who might have answers about her father's death. Now, Sofia continued, shall we discuss your future? There are certain expectations that come with being a Romano wife. Expectations, loyalty, discretion, the understanding that family business stays within the family. Sofia's gray eyes were ice cold. I trust we understand each other. Isabella nodded mutely, her throat too tight for words. Excellent. Oh, and Isabella, that investigation into your father's unfortunate accident. Consider it closed. Some stories don't have happy endings, and some questions are better left unasked. With that, Sofia glided away, leaving Isabella alone on the landing with the knowledge that she was trapped by debt, by obligation, by the web of lies and secrets that surrounded the Romano family like a cocoon. But as she stood there in her wedding dress, diamond tiara catching the afternoon light, Isabella made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find out the truth about her father's death, no matter what it cost her, even if it cost her everything, even if it cost her her life. Because as she returned to her room and saw her reflection in the mirror, beautiful, trapped, and desperate, Isabella realized something that should have terrified her but instead filled her with a strange, reckless courage. She had nothing left to lose. The church bells of San Lorenzo began their evening song as the sun painted the Tuscan sky in shades of rose and gold. 300 guests filled the chapel, their whispered conversations creating a symphony of anticipation that echoed off the ancient stone walls. Isabella stood at the back of the church, her arm linked through her Uncle Roberto's, waiting for foul music to begin. Through the gossamer veil that had belonged to 5 generations of Romano brides, she could see Marco at the altar, resplendent in his midnight black tuxedo, his golden hair gleaming in the candlelight. Next to him stood Alessandro, as his best man, dark and dangerous in the same formal wear that somehow looked entirely different on his broader frame. Even from this distance, she could feel his eyes in her, burning through silk and lace to the woman beneath. You look beautiful, little one, Uncle Roberto whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He was her father's younger brother, the only family she had left, and the man who would walk her down the aisle in Vincent's place. Papa would be so proud. Isabella squeezed his arm, not trusting herself to speak. If her father could see her now, would he be proud or would he beg her to run? The organ began the opening notes of Pachelbel's canon, and the congregation rose as one. This was her last chance to turn around, to gather up her skirts and flee through the chapel doors into the gathering dusk. Instead, she took her first step toward the altar, toward Marco, toward the life she'd chosen, toward Alessandro's eyes, which never left her face. The walk down the aisle felt like swimming through honey, each step slower than the last, each breath more difficult than the one before. Faces blurred past her, business associates of the Romano family, society matrons who'd known her since childhood, distant relatives who whispered behind their hands about the poor Marchetti girl who'd landed such a fortunate match. If only they knew how fortunate. Halfway down the aisle, Isabella's step faltered. In the third row, partially hidden behind a pillar, sat a figure she recognized with a jolt of terror. Detective Caruso, the policeman who had investigated her father's death. The same man who had assured her it was an accident. that there was nothing suspicious about Vincent Marchetti's car sliding off that mountain road on a clear, dry night. What was he doing here? Their eyes met for a split second, and Detective Caruso gave her the slightest nod, not congratulatory, but warning. Then he melted back into the shadows behind the pillar, leaving Isabella to wonder if she'd imagined him entirely. "Breathe," Uncle Roberto whispered. "You're almost there." But Isabella felt like she was drowning. The chapel seemed to be closing in around her, the candlelight growing dimmer, the faces in the congregation transforming into a jury of her peers, here to witness not a wedding but an execution. Finally, mercifully, they reached the altar. Uncle Roberto kissed her cheek, whispered, "Be happy, little one," and placed her hand in Marco's. Marco's touch was warm, steady, reassuring. He smiled down at her with such genuine love and adoration that Isabella felt a stab of guilt so sharp it nearly brought her to her knees. "You're shaking?" he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. "Wedding nerves," she managed. "I've got you," Marco said, and squeezed her hands gently. "I'll always have you." The priest began the ceremony, his Latin words washing over them like a blessing or a curse. Isabella could no longer tell the difference. She managed to speak her responses at the appropriate times, her voice somehow steady despite the chaos in her heart. But all the while, she was aware of Alessandro standing just feet away, his presence like a magnet pulling at her attention. Once, when the priest asked them to join hands for prayer, she glanced in his direction and found him staring at her, with such naked longing that she had to look away before Marco noticed. The ceremony progressed with dreamlike inevitability. Rings were exchanged, a brilliant cut diamond caught the candlelight like captured fire. Vows were spoken, words of love and fidelity that tasted like ash in Isabella's mouth. The priest blessed their union in Latin, English, and Italian, as if hedging his spits against divine intervention. "You may kiss the bride," the priest finally announced. Marco lifted her veil with trembling hands, his blue eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. "I love you, Isabella Romano," he whispered. The kiss was soft, sweet, chased the kiss of a man who planned to spend a lifetime loving her gently. The congregation erupted in applause. Rose petals fell like snow, and Isabella found herself officially, legally, irrevocably bound to a man whose family had destroyed her father. As they walked back down the aisle arm in arm, Isabella caught glimpses of faces in the crowd. Sophia Romano smiling like a satisfied cat, Uncle Roberto dabbing at his eyes with his handkerchief, Detective Caruso already gone from his seat as if he'd never been there at all, and Alessandro watching her with an expression she couldn't read but felt in her bones: regret, desire, and something that looked dangerously like goodbye. Outside the chapel, photographers swarmed them like well-dressed vultures, their flashbulbs creating momentary starbursts of white light. Isabella smiled and posed and accepted congratulations, playing her part in the elaborate theater of her own destruction. "Mrs. Romano," one photographer called out, "how does it feel to be part of the family?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Mrs. Romano, she was no longer Isabella Marchetti, investigated or seeking truth about her father's death. She was Isabella Romano, decorative wife, expected to smile and stay silent and never ask inconvenient questions. "It feels like a dream," she heard herself say, and realized with bitter irony that it was the first completely honest thing she'd said all day. The reception was held in the gardens of the Romano estate, transformed into something from a fairy tale, with thousands of white roses, silver candelabras, and gossamer draping that made the entire space glow like captured moonlight. A 12-piece orchestra played while guests mingled on the marble terraces, champagne flutes glittering in the torchlight. Isabella and Marco made their grand entrance to thunderous applause, then took their places at the head table where they could survey their kingdom of well-wishers and wedding gifts. The conversation flowed around them, business deals discussed over antipasti, family gossip shared between courses, compliments on the bride's beauty and the groom's fortune. But Isabella was only half. Her attention kept drifting to Alessandro, who sat 3 seats away, making polite conversation with Great and Francesca while his dark eyes periodically found hers across the table. Every time their gazes met, Isabella felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with wedding night nerves and everything to do with the man she should have married instead. "You're not eating," Marco observed, his voice gentle with concern. Isabella looked down at her plate: stuffed quail with truffle sauce, roasted vegetables, champagne risotto, all of it untouched and growing cold. "I'm too excited to eat," she lead, lifting her wine glass to her lips. The Chianti was excellent, probably worth more than most people's monthly salary, but it tasted like copper pennies on her tongue. "Save room for the cake," Marco said, gesturing toward the towering confection at the center of their guerdon: 5 layers of white chocolate and raspberry, decorated with sugar roses and crowned with a crystal sculpture of 2 doves. It was beautiful. Everything was beautiful. Her dress, the flowers, the setting, the man beside her hollered her with his whole heart. So why did Isabella feel like she was attending her own funeral? The speeches began as the main course was cleared away. Uncle Roberto stood first, his voice thick with emotion as he talked about watching Isabella grow up, about how proud her father would have been, about welcoming Marco into their small family. Then, Alessandro rose, champagne flute in hand, and Isabella's heart stopped. "I've known my brother Marco my entire life," Alessandro began, his voice carrying easily across their den. "I've seen him succeed in business, earn the respect of our family, and prove himself as a man of honor and integrity." The words were perfectly appropriate, but Isabella heard the subtext underneath the things Alessandro could say in front of 300 guests about the Romano family business, about the decisions Marco would have to make, about the woman he was inheriting along with the company. "But tonight," Alessandro continued, his eyes finding Isabella's across the table, "I've seen something even more remarkable. I've seen him find the woman who will make him complete." The crowd murmured their approval, but Isabella felt like she was drowning in the dark honey of Alessandro's voice, in the way he was looking at her as he spoke about his brother's happiness. "Isabella," Alessandro said, raising his glass in her direction, "you are truly the most beautiful bride I've ever seen. Marco is the luckiest man in Italy." The toast was drunk, applause rang out, and Isabella managed to smile and nod graciously while her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, because she recognized the truth in Alessandro's words, not the public toast, but the private message beneath. He was saying goodbye. He was letting her go, officially and finally, to the life she'd chosen and the man she'd married. The dancing began shortly after midnight, with Marco leading Isabella onto the marble dance floor for their first waltz as husband and wife. The orchestra played La Vienne Rose, and Isabella closed her eyes as Marco spun her slowly among the rose petals and candlelight, trying to lose herself in the romance of the moment. But even with her eyes closed, she could feel Alessandro watching, could sense the tension radiating from him like heat from a flame. When the song ended and other couples joined them on the dance floor, Isabella found herself partnered with various family friends and business associates, each dance bringing her closer to the inevitable moment when tradition would demand she dance with the best man. "May I?" Alessandro's voice was low, polite, perfectly appropriate for the situation. Isabella looked around for Marco, but he was deep in conversation with his mother near the champagne fountain, probably discussing business matters that couldn't wait even for his wedding night. "Of course," she said, accepting Alessandro's outstretched hand. His touch was electric, sending shockwaves up her arm as he led her onto the dance floor. They moved a toga with the kind of natural rhythm that comes from two people who are perfectly matched, how to understand each other on a level that transcends words or reason. "You look beautiful tonight," Alessandro murmured as they swayed to the music, his breath warm against their ear. "Thank you. I mean it, Isabella, you look like a princess." She pulled back to meet his eyes, and what she saw there made her breath catch, pain, longing, and something else, something that looked like a man who was about to do something desperate. "Alessandro, I have something for you," he said, his voice barely audible over the music. "A wedding gift. You already gave us a gift, the silver tea service. This is different, personal." His hand moved to the inside pocket of his jacket, and Isabella saw the edge of an envelope. "Meet me in the library in 10 minutes. There's something you need to know about your—" Before she could respond, the song ended and Alessandro was bowing formally, thanking her for the dance, melting back into the crowd like smoke. Isabella stood on the dance floor, her heart hammering against her ribs as the reality of the situation over her like a cold wave. Alessandro had information about her father's death, information important enough to risk everything to share with her. Information that could change everything. As she made her way through the crowd of well-wishers accepting congratulations and kisses, Isabella made a decision that would alter the course of not just her wedding night, but her entire life. She was going to meet him, whatever the consequences, whatever the cost. She was finally going to learn the truth about Vincent Marchetti, even if that truth destroyed her marriage before it had truly begun. The Romano library was a sanctuary of mahogany and leather, its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves holding volumes in 6 languages, some so ancient their spines were held together more by reverence than binding. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across Persian rugs and antique furniture. Isabella slipped inside precisely 10 minutes after Alessandro's invitation, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it could be heard over the distant music from the reception. She'd told Marco she needed a moment to freshen up, that the excitement of the day was overwhelming her, another lie to add to the collection she'd been building since dawn. Alessandro stood with his back to her, silhouetted against the windows like a figure from a Gothic novel. He'd removed his jacket and loosened his tie, and there was something about his stance, rigid, defensive, like a man preparing for battle, made Isabella's mouth go dry. "You came," he said without turning around. "You said you had information about my father." "I do." Alessandro finally faced her, and Isabella saw that he looked haggard, older than his 35 years. "But first, there's something else we need to discuss." What? Instead of answering, Alessandro moved to the massive oak desk that dominated the center of the room. He opened the top drawer and withdrew a manila envelope, thick with papers. "Your wedding gift," he said, extending it toward her. Isabella approached cautiously, as if the envelope might bite her. "What is it?" "Flight reservations, passport documentation for a new identity, and enough money to disappear forever." The words hit her like physical blows. Isabella stared at the envelope, then at Alessandro's face, trying to process what he was telling her. You want me to run away? On my wedding night, I want you to live. Alessandro's voice was rough with emotion. This family will destroy you, Isabella, just like they destroyed your father. What do you mean? Alessandro ran his hands through his dark hair, messing the careful styling. Vincent Marchetti wasn't killed in a car accident. He was murdered. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Isabella gripped the back of a leather chair for support, her knees threatening to buckle. That's impossible. The police investigated. The police were bought. Alessandro's laugh was bitter. Detective Caruso received 50,000 euros to file a report that said your father lost control of his car on a wet road. But it wasn't raining that night, Isabella. It hadn't rained in 3 weeks. How do you know this? Because I was there. The confession hung between them like a death sentence. Isabella stared at Alessandro, trying to reconcile the man she thought she knew, with the stranger standing before her. You were there, she repeated slowly. When my father died. Yes, did you... She couldn't finish the question, couldn't voice the terrible possibility that was taking shape in her mind. Did I kill him? Alessandro's smile was full of self-loathing. No, but I didn't stop it from happening either. Isabella sank into the chair, her wedding dress pooling around her feet like spilled milk. Tell me everything. Alessandro poured himself a glass of whiskey from the crystal decanter on a side table, downing it in one swallow before continuing. Your father discovered something he shouldn't have. Financial records that proved the Romano family business wasn't with just luxury real estate and fine wine. We're money launderers, Isabella. We clean dirty cash for some very dangerous people. I don't believe you. Vincent found bank records showing deposits from the Calabrian mafia, the Russian mob, cartels, from South America, hundreds of millions of dollars flowing through Romano accounts, then dispersed through legitimate businesses to emerge clean on the other side. Isabella shook her head, but pieces were starting to fall into place. The mysterious phone calls her father had been receiving in his final weeks, the way he'd been jumpy and distracted, the expensive security system he'd installed at their modest house. He tried to blackmail my mother, Alessandro continued. Said he'd go to the authorities unless Sheffer gave his gambling debts and paid him another €1,000,000 on top of it. And what did your mother do? Alessandro's jaw tightened. What she always does. She eliminated the threat. But you said you didn't kill him. I didn't. But I was supposed to. Alessandro set down his empty glass with shaking hands. Mother sent him to negotiate with your father, to find out how much he knew and how much it would cost to buy his silence. But when I got to that mountain road, Vincent was already dead. Isabella felt sick. Who killed him? Mother's other son, her real enforcer. Alessandro's voice was flat, emotionless. My half-brother Dante. You've never met him because he handles the family's more unsavory business. If you weren't supposed to kill my father, why are you telling me you were there? Alessandro met her eyes, and Isabella saw something break inside him. Because I let it happen. I knew what mother was planning, and I could have warned Vincent. I could have told him to run, to disappear, to take you with him to somewhere safe. But you didn't. No, because I was already in love with you, and warning your father would have meant losing any chance of being near you. The confession was raw, desperate. So I stayed silent. And Vincent Marchetti didn't. You came to his funeral wearing black and looking so lost that it took everything I had not to tell you the truth right then. Isabella stared at him, processing the magnitude of what he'd just revealed. Her father hadn't died, and Annick said he'd been murdered by the family she'd just married into. The man she'd been in love with for 2 years had known the truth all along and said nothing. You let me mourn him as an accident victim, she said quietly. You let me believe he was just unlucky, that these things happen, that there was no one to blame. Yes, you watched me fall in love with Marco, knowing his family killed my father. Yes, you attended our engagement party, our wedding, knowing I was marrying into the family that destroyed mine. Yes. Alessandro's voice was barely a whisper. Isabella stood slowly, smoothing her skirts with hands that only trembled slightly. Why are you telling this now, after it's too late? Because it's not too late. Alessandro grabbed the envelope from the desk, pressing it into her hands. You can still leave. Tonight, before this marriage becomes a prison you can never escape from. Isabella looked down at the envelope, feeling its weight, not just the papers inside, but the weight of their choice it represented. Freedom, but at the cost of everything she'd built. Truth, but at the price of safety. A life with the man she loved, but only as fugitives running from one of the most powerful families in you. And what about you? She asked. If I disappear, your family will know you helped me. They'll kill you. Maybe, or maybe they'll just disown me. Either way, I deserve whatever happens. That's not your choice to make. Isabella set the envelope on the desk with deliberate care. You don't get to decide my life for me. Not again. Alessandro's face went pale. Isabella, you had 2 years to tell me the truth. 2 years to give me this choice when it mattered. Instead, you stayed silent and let me walk down that aisle. To marry the son of my father's murderer. I was trying to protect you. You were protecting yourself. The words exploded from Isabella with 2 years' worth of supersedrage and betrayal. You didn't want to lose access to me, so you let me live a lie. You let me plan a wedding, choose flowers, taste cakes, all while knowing that every smile I gave Marco was built on my father's grave. Alessandro flinched as if she'd struck him. You're right. I know I'm right. Isabella moved toward the door, then stopped. Is there anything else? Any other earth-shattering revelations you'd like to share before I go back to my wedding reception? Just one. Alessandro's voice was so quiet she had to strain to hear him. I love you. I've loved you since the moment Marco introduced us, and I'll love you until the day I die. That's the only truth I have left. Isabella closed her eyes, fighting back tears that would ruin her makeup and raise questions she wasn't prepared to answer. That's not enough, she whispered. Love without trust, without honesty, without courage. It's just another kind of lie. She reached for the door handle, but Alessandro's voice stopped her. If you stay, you'll become like us, like my mother, like Marco, like everyone in this family. You'll learn Tasmo while people disappear, to sleep soundly while blood gets washed from your hands with money and influence. Is that really what you want? Isabella turned back to face him one last time. What I want doesn't matter anymore. I made my choice I said I do. The question is, what are you going to do with yours? With that, she opened the library door and stepped back into the hallway, leaving Alessandro alone with his guilt and his whiskey and the envelope full of documents that represented the life she'd chosen not to take. But as Isabella made her way back to the reception, smoothing her expression into appropriate bridal radiance, she carried with her not just the terrible knowledge of her father's murder, but a plan that had been forming since the moment Alessandro confessed his cowardice. She wasn't going to run, she wasn't going to disappear into the night like a victim. She was going to destroy the Romano family from the inside, starting with the wedding night that would give her access to everything she needed. The bride who everyone thought they'd trapped had just become the most dangerous woman in Italy, and they had no idea what was coming. The reception was still in full swing when Isabella returned, her absence having gone unnoticed in their swirl of champagne and celebration. She found Marco holding court near the wedding cake, regaling a group of business associates with a story about their honeymoon plans 2 weeks in the Maldives, staying in an overwater bungalow that cost more than most people's houses. There's my beautiful wife, Marco said as she approached, his arm automatically circling her waist. I was just telling everyone about our plans for the Seychelles, the Maldives, Isabella corrected gently, surprised that her voice sounded so normal when everything inside her had been turned upside down. Right, the Maldives. Marco's laugh was easy, untroubled. I'm so excited I can't think straight. The men around them chuckled indulgently, but Isabella caught the looks exchanged between them, the subtle acknowledgement that Marco Romano had always been the weaker of the two brothers. Charming but not quite sharp enough for the family business, which was exactly what made him perfect for what Isabella needed to do. Where did you disappear to? Marco asked quietly as the group's attention turned to other topics. Just needed some air. The excitement was getting to me. I know the feeling. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this was all a dream. Marco's smile was so genuine, so full of love and happiness, that Isabella felt a stab of guilt pierce through her rage. He didn't know. Marco truly had no idea what his family had done to hers. Marco, she said carefully, how much do you know about your family's business? His expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. What do you mean? I mean beyond the real estate and wine, the other investments, the international clients, ... Isabella. Marco's voice was firm but not unkind. That's not something wives need to worry about. That's men's business. The dismissal was so casual, so automatic, that Isabella realized Marco had been trained from birth to compartmentalize, to separate the clean public face of the family from whatever darker truths lay beneath. He might genuinely not know about the money laundering, the connections to organized crime, the murders, or he might know and be very good at pretending otherwise. I'm just curious about what I'm becoming part of, Isabella said lightly. You are becoming part of the most important thing, the family. Everything else is just details. Before Isabella could probe further, the orchestra leader announced that it was time for the cake cutting. Flashbulbs popped as Marco and Isabella posed with a ceremonial silver knife. Their hands joined as they made the first cut into the towering confection. Make a wish, Marco whispered in her ear. Isabella closed her eyes and made a wish that would have terrified her new husband if he'd known what it was. Let me find the evidence I need to destroy the people who killed my father. The cake was raspberry and white chocolate, light and sweet and perfectly executed. Isabella managed to eat a few bites while accepting congratulations from the seemingly endless stream of guests who wanted to share in their happiness. But all the while, she was cataloging faces, memorizing names, noting which guests seemed to know other from contexts beyond social acquaintance. The man with the Calabrian accent who spoke too quietly and kept checking his phone. The elegant woman with Russian features who kissed sapphire cheeks like an old friend. The group of South American businessmen who dressed too well and carried like soldiers. These weren't just wedding guests, they were clients, representatives of the very organizations Alessandro had mentioned. here to pay their respects to the family that cleaned their blood money. You look like you're studying for an exam, a voice said behind her. Isabella turned to find Detective Caruso, looking distinctly out of place in his ill-fitting tuxedo among the designer-clad crowd. Detective, she said, surprised. I wasn't sure if I'd imagined seeing you at the church. Your uncle invited me. Said your father would have wanted someone from the force to witness your big day. Caruso's smile didn't reach his eyes. Vincent spoke of you often. How proud he was. How worried was about your future. The words hit Isabella like arrows, each one carefully aimed. Caruso knew something, maybe everything. Worried about my future. He thought you were too trusting, too willing to see the best in people. Caruso's gaze drifted to where Rossandro stood near the bar, nursing another whiskey. He said it would either save you or damn you, and he wasn't sure which. Detective, about my father's accident. Beautiful evening for a wedding, Caruso interrupted smoothly. Though I noticed the groom's family has some interesting friends. He nodded toward the group of South Americans, who were deep in conversation with Sophia near Tharos garden. I wouldn't know, Isabella said carefully. No, I don't suppose you would, yet. Caruso finished his champagne and set the empty flute on a passing waiter's tray. Enjoy your honeymoon, Mrs. Romano, and remember sometimes the people we'll love us most are the ones who can't tell us the truth, even when our lives depend on it. With that cryptic comment, he melted back into the crowd, leaving Isabella with the distinct impression that she'd just been given a warning disguised as congratulations. The evening wore on with speeches, more dancing, and the gradual departure of the older guests. By twine the morning, only family and close friends remained, clustered around the bar or scattered across the marble terraces in small, intimate groups. Isabella found herself seated at a table with Marco's younger cousins, listening to them gossip about family scandals and business rivalries. Most of it was harmless: who was sleeping with whom, which uncle had lost money in bad investments, which cousin had been cut off for embarrassing the family nami. But occasionally, something more serious slipped through. Did you hear about the Toretti family? One of the cousins, a vapid socialite named Camilla, was saying. Completely bankrupt, lost everything to the tax authorities. Shame, another cousin replied, though I heard Uncle Dante had to make a personal visit to convince Itham to cooperate with the audit. The table went quiet at the mention of Dante's name. Isabella filed the information away, another piece off the puzzle Alessandro had started revealing. Who's Uncle Dante? Isabella asked innocently. The cousins exchanged glances. You haven't met him yet? Camilla asked. He's Aunt Sophia's eldest son, different father from Marco and Alessandro. He travels a lot, another cousin added quickly. Business overseas. What kind of business? More exchanged looks. Finally, Camilla leaned. Let's just say Dante handles the family's more delicate situations. You'll probably never meet him, and that's probably for the best. The conversation was interrupted by Marco's approach, slightly unsteady from champagne and celebration. Ladies, he said with exaggerated gallantry, I need to steal my wife away. It's time for the newlyweds to retire. Isabella's stomach clenched. She'd been dreading this moment, not just because of the wedding night itself, but because of what it represented. The final sealing of her fate, the consummation of a marriage built on lies and murder. But as Marco helped her to her feet, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple, Isabella realized something that changed everything. She needed this marriage consummated. She needed to be fully, legally, irrevocably a Romano, because only as Marco's wife would she have access to the family's inner sanctum. Only as a Romana could she get close enough to find the evidence she needed to destroy them all. Ready to go? Marco asked, his eyes bright with love and anticipation. Isabella smiled, and for the first time all day, it wasn't entirely forced. I've been ready all my life, she said, and meant it in ways he could never imagine. As they made their way through the remaining guests, accepting final congratulations and well wishes, Isabella caught sight of Alessandro standing alone near the rose garden. He was watching them with an expression of such profound loss that Isabella almost felt sorry for him. But then she remembered her father's face the last time she'd seen him alive, the way he'd kissed her forehead and told her he was working on something that would secure her future forever. Vincent Marchetti had died trying to protect his daughter from the very family she'd just married into. It was time to finish what he'd started. The reception was still in full swing when Isabella returned, her absence having gone unnoticed in their swirl of champagne and celebration. She found Marco holding court near the wedding cake, regaling a group of business associates with a story about their honeymoon plans: 2 weeks in the Maldives, staying in an overwater bungalow that cost more than most people's houses. There's my beautiful wife, Marco said as she approached, his arm automatically circling her waist. I was just telling everyone about our plans for the Seychelles, the Maldives, Isabella corrected gently, surprised that her voice sounded so normal when everything inside her had been turned upside down. Right, the Maldives. Marco's laugh was easy, untroubled. I'm so excited I can't think straight. The men around them chuckled indulgently, but Isabella caught the looks exchanged between them, the subtle acknowledgement that Marco Romano had always been the weaker of the two brothers. Charming but not quite sharp enough for the family business, which was exactly what made him perfect for what Isabella needed to do. Where did you disappear to? Marco asked quietly as the group's attention turned to other topics. Just needed some air. The excitement was getting to me. I know the feeling. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this was all a dream. Marco's smile was so genuine, so full of love and happiness, that Isabella felt a stab of guilt pierce through her rage. He didn't know. Marco truly had no idea what his family had done to hers. Marco, she said carefully, how much do you know about your family's business? His expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. What do you mean? I mean beyond the real estate and wine. The other investments, the international clients, ... Isabella. Marco's voice was firm but not unkind. That's not something wives need to worry about. That's men's business. The dismissal was so casual, so automatic, that Isabella realized Marco had been trained from birth to compartmentalize to separate the clean public face of the family from whatever darker truths lay beneath. He might genuinely not know about the money laundering, the connections to organized crime, the murders, or he might know and be very good at pretending otherwise. I'm just curious about what I'm becoming part of, Isabella said lightly. You are becoming part of the most important thing, the family. Everything else is just details. Before Isabella could probe further, the orchestra leader announced that it was time for the cake cutting. Flashbulbs popped as Marco and Isabella posed with a ceremonial silver knife. Their hands joined as they made the first cut into the towering confection. Make a wish, Marco whispered in her ear. Isabella closed her eyes and made a wish that would have terrified her new husband if he'd known what it was. Let me find the evidence I need to destroy the people who killed my father. The cake was raspberry and white chocolate, light and sweet and perfectly executed. Isabella managed to eat a few bites while accepting congratulations from the seemingly endless stream of guests who wanted to share in their happiness. But all the while, she was cataloging faces, memorizing names, noting which guests seemed to know other from contexts beyond social acquaintance. The man with the Calabrian accent who spoke too quietly and kept checking his phone. The elegant woman with Russian features who kissed sapphire cheeks like an old friend. The group of South American businessmen who dressed too well and carried like soldiers. These weren't just wedding guests, they were clients, representatives of the very organizations Alessandro had mentioned, here to pay their respects to the family that cleaned their blood money. You look like you're studying for an exam, a voice said behind her. Isabella turned to find Detective Caruso, looking distinctly out of place in his ill-fitting tuxedo among the designer-clad crowd. Detective, she said, surprised. I wasn't sure if I'd imagined seeing you at the church. Your uncle invited me. Said your father would have wanted someone from the force to witness your big day. Caruso's smile didn't reach his eyes. Vincent spoke of you often. How proud he was. How worried was about your future. The words hit Isabella like arrows, each one carefully aimed. Caruso knew something, maybe everything. Worried about my future. He thought you were too trusting, too willing to see the best in people. Caruso's gaze drifted to where Rossandro stood near the bar, nursing another whiskey. He said it would either save you or damn you, and he wasn't sure which. Detective, about my father's accident. Beautiful evening for a wedding, Caruso interrupted smoothly. Though I noticed the groom's family has some interesting friends, he nodded toward the group of South Americans, who were deep in conversation with Sophia near Tharos Garden. I wouldn't know, Isabella said carefully. No, I don't suppose you would, yet. Caruso finished his champagne and set the empty flute on a passing waiter's tray. Enjoy your honeymoon, Mrs. Romano, and remember sometimes the people will love us most are the ones who can't tell us the truth, even when our lives depend on it. With that cryptic comment, he melted back into the crowd, leaving Isabella with the distinct impression that she'd just been given a warning disguised as congratulations. The evening wore on with speeches, more dancing, and the gradual departure of the older guests. By twine the morning, only family and close friends remained, clustered around the bar or scattered across the marble terraces in small, intimate groups. Isabella found herself seated at a table with Marco's younger cousins, listening to them gossip about family scandals and business rivalries. Most of it was harmless: who was sleeping with whom, which uncle had lost money in bad investments, which cousin had been cut off for embarrassing the family nami. But occasionally, something more serious slipped through. Did you hear about the Toretti family? One of the cousins, a vapid socialite named Camilla, was saying. Completely bankrupt, lost everything to the tax authorities. Shame, another cousin replied, though I heard Uncle Dante had to make a personal visit to convince Itham to cooperate with the audit. The table went quiet at the mention of Dante's name. Isabella filed the information away, another piece off the puzzle Alessandro had started revealing. Who's Uncle Dante? Isabella asked innocently. The cousins exchanged glances. You haven't met him yet? Camilla asked. He's Aunt Sophia's eldest son, different father from Marco and Alessandro. He travels a lot, another cousin added quickly. Business overseas. What kind of business? More exchanged looks. Finally, Camilla leaned. Let's just say Dante handles the family's more delicate situations. You'll probably never meet him, and that's probably for the best. The conversation was interrupted by Marco's approach, slightly unsteady from champagne and celebration. Ladies, he said with exaggerated gallantry, I need to steal my wife away. It's time for the newlyweds to retire. Isabella's stomach clenched. She'd been dreading this moment not just because of the wedding night itself, but because of what it represented. The final sealing of her fate, the consummation of a marriage built on lies and murder. But as Marco helped her to her feet, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple, Isabella realized something that changed everything. She needed this marriage consummated. She needed to be fully, legally, irrevocably a Romano, because only as Marco's wife would she have access to the family's inner sanctum. Only as a Romana could she get close enough to find the evidence she needed to destroy them all. Ready to go? Marco asked, his eyes bright with love and anticipation. Isabella smiled, and for the first time all day, it wasn't entirely forced. I've been ready all my life, she said, and meant it in ways he could never imagine. As they made their way through the remaining guests, accepting final congratulations and well wishes, Isabella caught sight of Alessandro standing alone near the rose garden. He was watching them with an expression of such profound loss that Isabella almost felt sorry for him but then she remembered her father's face the last time she'd seen him alive, the way he'd kissed her forehead and told her he was working on something that would secure her future forever. Vincent Marchetti had died trying to protect his daughter from the very family she'd just married into. It was time to finish what he'd started. The master suite of the Romano estate was a study in understated luxury cream silk wallpaper, antiqua furniture that had belonged to Italian nobility, and French doors that opened onto a private balcony overlooking the vineyards. Moonlight streamed through the gauze curtains, casting everything in silver and shadow. Isabella stood at the vanity, removing her diamond tiara with hands that barely trembled. In the mirror's reflection she could see Marco in the sitting area, pouring champagne into crystal flutes while he waited for her to emerge from behind the silk screen where her wedding dress hung like a ghost. She'd changed into a nightgown that had been a gift from Sophie, ivory silk that flowed like water with delicate lace at the shoulders and a neckline that was both modest and seductive. It was beautiful, expensive, and felt like wearing a shroud. Isabella. Marco's voice was gentle, patient. Are you all right? Just nervous, she called back, applying the perfume he'd given her for their 6-month anniversary, something French and floral that smelled like garden parties and innocence. She was stalling, and they both knew it, but Isabella needed these few minutes to steel herself for what was about to happen. Not just the physical intimacy she'd been preparing for that part since accepting his proposal. It was the emotional weight of it all, the knowledge that she was about to give her body to a man whose family had murdered her father. But it was also an opportunity. In the aftermath of their wedding night, when Marco was relaxed and she might be able to learn things that could help her investigation. Taking a deep breath, Isabella stepped out from behind the screen. Marco's reaction was immediate and genuine, his face lit up with wonder and desire. The champagne glass forgotten in his hand as he took in the sight of her in the moonlight. You're so beautiful, he breathed, setting down his glass and moving toward her. I can't believe you're really mine. The possessive language should have made her skin crawl, but Isabella forced herself to smile as Marco's found her waist, drawing her closer. I can't believe it either, she said, and that was the absolute truth. Marco's kiss was gentle, reverent, as if he was afraid she might disappear if he held her too tightly. His hands shook slightly as they traced the silk of her nightgown, and Isabella realized with a start that despite his worldly sophistication, Marco was almost as nervous as she was. I've dreamed about this night for so long, he whispered against her ear. Isabella closed her eyes, allowing herself to be led toward the massive 4-poster bed with its canopy of cream silk. She tried to focus on the physical sensations, Marco's warm hands, his gentle kisses, the softness of the Egyptian cotton sheets as he laid her down with careful reverence. But her mind kept wandering to Alessandro's confession, to her father's murder, to the knowledge that somewhere in this house were documents and records that could bring down everyone responsible. Are you with me? Marco asked suddenly, pulling back to study her face in the moonlight. Isabella realized she'd been distant, distracted, and quickly refocused on her new husband. Of course, I'm just overwhelmed. Marco smiled understandingly. We have all the time in the world, there's no rush. But that's where he was wrong. Isabella felt the pressure of time like a physical weight. Every moment she spent playing the role of dutiful wife was another moment the evidence could disappear. Anathema meant the truth about her father's death moved further from her grasp. So she made a decision that went against every instinct she possessed. She kissed him, not the passive, gentle kiss he'd been giving her, but something urgent and hungry that made his breath catch in surprise. She let her hands tangle in his golden hair, pressed her body against his, gave him the passion he'd been hoping for. Isabella, he gasped, and she could hear the wonder in his voice, wondered that his shy, proper bride was suddenly so responsive. What followed was tender, careful, and completely heartbreaking in its sincerity. Marco made love to her like she was something precious and fragile, whispering endearments in Italian, taking his time to ensure her pleasure before his own. He was gentle, patient, loving everything a woman could want in a husband. And Isabella hated herself for what she was doing to him. Because even as her body responded to his touch, even as she allowed him the intimacy he'd been dreaming of, her mind was calculating, planning, using his vulnerability against him. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the silk sheets with moonlight painting patterns across their skin, Marco traced lazy circles on Isabella's shoulder. "I love you so much," he murmured sleepily. "I want to give you everything, the world, if I could." "I don't need the world," Isabella said softly. "Just you and maybe understanding." Isabella turned in his arms, studying his face in the dim light. "I want to understand your family's business better. I want to be a real partner to you, not just a decoration." Marco's expression grew cautious. "Isabella, we talked about this. I know what you said. But I'm your wife now. Shouldn't I know what I'm part of?" She traced patterns on his chest, keeping her voice light and curious rather than demanding. "I promise I'm not trying to interfere. I just want to understand the world I've married into." Marco was quiet for a long moment, considering. Finally he sighed. "The family business is ... complicated. We have investments all over the world. Clients who value discretion above all else. Some of the money that comes through our accounts, ISN T ... clean." Isabella's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "What do you mean by not clean?" "Money from sources that prefer to remain anonymous. Funds that need to be processed through legitimate businesses before they can be used." Marco's voice was careful, clinical. "It's not illegal. Exactly, more like creative accounting." It was illegal, of course, and they both knew it. But Isabella could see that Marco had convinced himself otherwise, had built a wall of rationalization that let him sleep at night. "Do you ever worry about the authorities?" she asked. "Mother handles all of that. She has connections everywhere. Police, judges, government officials." Weary protected. Marco's arm tightened around her. "You don't need to worry about any of this, Isabella. I'll always keep you safe." But Isabella was thinking about Detective Caruso's warning, about the way he'd looked at her during their assessment. The authorities might not be as controlled as the Romano family believed. "What about your brother?" she asked. "Alessandro seems different from you." Marco's body tensed slightly. "Alessandro handles a different side of the business. International relations, you could say. And your other brother, Dante." Isabella felt Marco go completely still beside her. "How do you know about Dante?" "Your cousins mentioned him at the reception. They said he travels a lot." "Dante isn't. He's not someone you need to concern yourself with," Marco said carefully. "He takes care of problems that can't be solved through normal business channels." The euphemism was clear, and Isabella filed it away with everything else she was learning. Dante was the family enforcer, the one who had actually killed her father, while Alessandro watched from the shadows. "Will I meet him?" "Probably not. Dante prefers to stay out of the public eye." Marco rolled over to face her, his expression sadly serious. "Isabella, I need you to promise me something. What if you ever meet Dante? If he ever approaches you when I'm not around, I want you to get away from him immediately and call me. Don't talk to him. Don't listen to anything he says. Just leave." The warning sent ice through Isabella's veins. "Is he dangerous?" "He's unpredictable, and he doesn't always understand boundaries when it comes to family members." Marco's hand cupped her face gently. "Promise me, Isabella, for my peace of mind." "I promise," she said, though privately she was thinking that meeting Dante might be exactly what she needed to do. Marco relaxed, pulling her closer. Within minutes, his breathing had evened out into the rhythm of sleep, leaving Isabella to stare at the ceiling and process everything she'd learned. The Romano family was definitely involved in money laundering, probably for organized crime syndicates. Sofia, they've had connections throughout law enforcement and government. Alessandro handled internet's all apparenche, and Dante was the family's killer. Dangerous enough that even Marco was afraid of him. It was more information than she'd had that morning, but not nearly enough to bring down the interior organization. For that, she'd need documentation, bank records, client lists, evidence of specific crimes, and to get that kind of evidence, she'd need to get close to Sofia. As Isabella lay in her new husband's arms, surrounded by luxury and lies, she began to formulate a plan. She would be the perfect Romano wife, charming, supportive, gradually working her way into Thefamoy's confidence, until they trusted her enough to give her access to their secrets. It would take time. It would require her to become someone she'd never wanted to be, and it would mean living a lie that grew deeper and more complex every day. But for her father's memory, for justice, for the chance to finally make the Romano family pay for what done, Isabella was willing to sacrifice everything, including the woman she used to be. Outside the windows, dawn was beginning to break over the Tuscan hills, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. It should have been beautiful, the first sunrise of her married life. Instead, it felt like the last sunrise of her innocence. Isabella Romano closed her eyes and began planning her revenge. Isabella woke to the smell of espresso and the sound of rain against the bedroom windows. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot the wedding, the revelations, the careful consummation offered marriage to a man whose family had destroyed hers. Then she saw Marco standing on the balcony in a white silk robe, steam rising from the coffee cup in his hands, and reality crashed back over her like a cold wave. She was no longer Isabella Marchetti. She was Isabella Romano, wife to a money launderer, daughter-in-law to a murderer, and the newest member of a criminal organization that had been masquerading as Italian nobility for decades. "Good morning, beautiful," Marco said as he noticed her stirring. He came back inside, setting his espresso on the nightstand before leaning down to kiss her forehead. "How did you sleep?" "Like the dead," Isabella said, then winced at her choice of words. Marco didn't notice, too focused on studying her face with the intensity of a man who couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this was all a dream," he said, echoing his words from the night before, "that you're too good to be true." Isabella managed to smile. "Very real, very married, very yours." The possessive language seemed to please him. Marco's grin was boyish, unguarded, and Isabella felt another stab of guilt for what she was planning to do to him. "I had breakfast brought up," Marco said, gesturing toward a silver cart by the windows. "I thought we could eat on the balcony. Even with the rain, there's something romantic about storms in Tuscany." Isabella wrapped herself in a silk robe cream-colored like everything else in this house and joined him at the small, wrought-iron table that had been set for two. The breakfast was elaborate: fresh fruit, pastries from Florence, eggs Benedict, and what looked like a week's worth of calories arranged on bone china. "This is beautiful," Isabella said, settling into her chair. "But don't you need to go to work?" "It's Thursday," Marco laughed. "I'm the boss. I think they can survive without me for a few days while I enjoy my new wife." "A few days? Well, our flight to the Maldives isn't until Saturday. I thought we could spend today and tomorrow getting reacquainted." The heat in his eyes made his meaning clear. Isabella's pulse quickened, but not with desire. 2 days alone with Marco meant 2 days away from the family estate, away from Sophia and the business records that might contain the evidence she needed. "Actually," she said carefully, "would it be terrible if we delayed the honeymoon for a week or two?" Marco's face fell. "You don't want to go?" "It's not that I just... This is all so new, so overwhelming. I'd love to spend some time getting to know your family better, understanding my new life before we disappear to paradise." Isabella reached across the table to take his hand. "Is that selfish of me?" "Not selfish at all," Marco said, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. "If that's what you want, we'll postpone the trip. Thank you." Isabella squeezed his hand. "I want to be the best Romano wife I can be. That means understanding what I've become part of." Something flickered across Marco's expression: surprise, maybe even concern. "Isabella, about last night. The things I told you about the business... Yes, I probably said more than I should have. The family has rules about what information gets shared and with whom." Marco's voice was gentle but firm. "I'd appreciate if those details stayed between us." Isabella nodded solemnly. "Of course I understand." But privately she was filing away another piece of information. The family had operational that were careful about information sharing, which meant getting access to documentation would be even more challenging than she'd thought. They finished breakfast in companionable silence, watching the rain turn the Tuscan landscape into something from an impressionist painting. Isabella found herself genuinely enjoying Marco's company. He was intelligent, funny, and completely devoted to making her happy. In another life, she might have been able to love him the way he deserved. Their intimate morning was interrupted by a soft knock on the bedroom door. "Come in," Marco called, not bothering to tighten his robe. The door opened to reveal a young woman Isabella recognized from the household staff: Maria, one-off maids who had helped with wedding preparations. "Excuse me, sir," Maria said, her eyes carefully averted from their state of undress. "Signora Romano has requested that you and your wife join her for lunch at 1 o'clock. Isabella's stomach clenched. Sophia wanted to see them. This could be routine, a family meal with their new bride, or it could be something else entirely. "Tell my mother we'll be there," Marco said. After Maria left, Marco turned to Isabella with an apologetic smile. "I'm afraid our private time is over. When mother summons, the family responds." "Of course," Isabella kept her voice light. "I should probably meet with her anyway, get some guidance on how to be a proper Romano wife. She liked that. Mother values tradition and protocol above almost everything else." Marco stood, stretching lazily. "I should probably shower and make myself presentable. Care to join me?" Isabella's cheeks flushed, partly from the invitation, partly from the realization that she was actually considering it. Playing the role of loving newlywed was becoming dangerously natural. "Maybe later," she said. "I should call my uncle, let him know we're postponing the honeymoon." Marco looked disappointed but nodded. "Use the phone in the sitting room." The international lines abetta after he disappeared into the marble bathroom. Isabella made her way to the antique telephone in Thesuit's sitting area, but instead of calling Uncle Roberto, she dialed a number she'd memorized weeks ago. "Caruso," came the gruff voice on the other end. "Detective, this is Isabella... Romano." A pause. "Congratulations on your marriage, Mrs. Romano. I trust your wedding night was... illuminating." The subtle emphasis made Isabella's pulse quicken. Caruso knew something, had expected her to learn something. It was educational, she said carefully. I'm sure it was. Tell me, are you planning to take a honeymoon? Not immediately. We're staying at the family estate for a few more days. Interesting. Well, should you need anything during your extended visit, advice, assistance, or simply say mean to talk to, I'm always available. Another pause. Your father was very fond of you, Mrs. Romano. He wanted you to have a good life, but more importantly, he wanted you to have a safe one. The warning was clear. Detective Caruso knew she was in danger, and he was offering help if she needed it. Thank you, Detective. I'll keep that in mind. Please do. And Mrs. Romano, sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who claim to love us most. The line went dead, leaving Isabella staring at the phone with her heart pounding. Caruso's final warning had been pointed. Specific. He wasn't just talking about the Romano family in general. He was warning her about someone close to her, someone who claimed to care about her welfare. Marco Alessandro, or someone else entirely. Isabella was still mulling over the conversation when Marco emerged from the bathroom, his golden hair damp and his skin glowing from the hot water. Everything all right? He asked, noticing her expression. Fine. Just wedding logistics with my uncle. Another lie. But they were becoming as natural as breathing. Should I dress formally for lunch with your mother? Conservative but elegant. Mother appreciates women who understand the importance of presentation. Marco moved to the enormous walk-in closet, pulling out a navy suit, and Isabella, yes. Be careful what you say to her today. Mother has very strong opinions about family loyalty and the proper behavior of Romano wives. She'll be evaluating you, trying to determine whether you truly belong with us. The warning sent ice through Isabella's veins. What happens if she decides, I don't belong? Marco's laugh was meant to be reassuring, but Isabella caught the edge of nervousness underneath. She won't. You're perfect for this family, but just ... be respectful. Let her lead the conversation. And whatever you do, don't bring up business matters. That's not a woman's concern in Mother's world. Isabella nodded obediently, but privately she was thinking that business matters were exactly what she needed to discuss with Sofia Romano, because somewhere in this house, in files and safes and computer systems, was the evidence that would finally bring justice for her father's murder, and Isabella Romano Marchetti was going to find it, no matter what the cost, even if it meant destroying the man she'd just married in the process. As Isabella selected a conservative black dress from her new wardrobe, she caught sight of herself in the length mirror. She looked different, somehow older, harder, more calculating than the insinuating woman who had walked down the aisle less than 24 hours ago. The transformation was beginning, and there was no turning back. The smaller dining room of the Romano estate was decorated in shades of burgundy and gold, with oil paintings of long-dead patriarchs watching from the walls like disapproving ghosts. Isabella chose her seat carefully, not too close to Sofia, which might seem presumptuous, but not so far away as to appear standoffish. She had chosen her outfit with equal care, a navy Armani dress with a modest neckline and hemline, pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, and minimal makeup that emphasized her natural beauty without appearing to try too hard. The perfect Romano wife. Traditional, elegant, decorative, completely harmless. Sofia entered precisely at 1 o'clock, dressed in a cream-colored Chanel suit that probably cost more than Isabella's father had earned in a month. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and a smile warm enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. Isabella knew better. Isabella, darling, Sofia said, air-kissing both her cheeks with practiced perfection. You look radiant. Marriage clearly agrees with you. Thank you, Signora Romano. I'm still pinching myself. Please, call me mother. We're family now. Sofia settled into her chair as Marco appeared, looking handsome but slightly harried in his charcoal suit. Sorry I'm late, mother. Last-minute call from the Hong Kong office. Sofia's eyes sharpened slightly. Anything urgent? The usual. Currency fluctuations affecting our investment portfolios. Marco kissed his mother's cheek for taking his seat. Nothing that can't wait until after lunch. Isabella noticed the coded language, the careful way both mother and son avoided specifics while discussing what was obviously Romano business. She also noticed the way Sofia's attention shifted to her whenever sensitive topics arose, measuring Isabella's reactions. Well, Sofia said as uniformed servers appeared with the first course, let's not bore Isabella with business talk. I want to hear all about your plans for married life. The soup was a delicate butternut squash bisque that probably required 3 hours of preparation. Isabella ate slowly, buying time to consider her responses. I'm hoping to learn as much as possible about the family's traditions, she said carefully. I want to be Anisette to Marco and to the Romano name. Admirable. And what about children? I assume you're planning to provide Marco with heirs. The question was delivered with a smile, but Isabella heard the steel underneath. Children weren't just hoped for, they were expected, required even, of course, Isabella said. Though we thought we'd enjoy being newlyweds for a little while first. Understandable, though one shouldn't wait too long. Family is everything in our world. Sophia's grey eyes fixed on Isabella with laser intensity. Blood ties are the only bonds that can truly be trusted. The comment felt loaded with meaning that Isabella couldn't quite decipher. Was Sophia testing her loyalty, warning her about something, or simply making conversation? I couldn't agree more, Isabella said. My father always taught me that family comes first, no matter what. Something flickered across Sophia's expression, surprise, maybe even approval. Your father was a good man, she said. A loyal friend to this family for many years. Isabella's pulse quickened. This was her opening, her chance to probe for information without seeming suspicious. He spoke of your late husband often, how they met during the war, how they built their business together. Isabella kept her voice wistful, nostalgic. I wonder if my father's death was harder on him because he'd lost his